What makes a good train service? If you ask me, I'd answer with fast, frequent service, it goes to places people want to go, and it's able to meet passenger demand without providing an uncomfortable service. In 2023, the T5 Cumberland line barely meets any of those goals. So in this video, I'm going to describe my issues with the line and how I think the government should go about improving it, alongside looking at the major parties to see if any of them have any relevant proposals. But before all that, we need a quick overview of the T5 to understand what it is. The T5 originally began as the City Rail Cumberland line. Service began in 1996 when the Parramatta Y-Link opened. This was done to provide a more direct route for commuters from Campbelltown, Liverpool and Cabramatta to Parramatta, which has since become a major destination for commuters. Prior to the Y-Link opening, commuters had to transfer at Granville. Originally, the line began at Campbelltown and terminated at Blacktown, stopping at all stations in between. Originally, services were every half hour, but subsequent timetables saw services reduced, until the line was only 2 Campbelltown to Blacktown services in the morning and 3 return in the evening. In 2006, the then Labor government promised to return half-hourly services, but this never happened. In 2013, the Liberal government reintroduced half-hourly services on the line and extended the terminus to Schofields. In 2017, the T5 was then modified to instead terminate at Leppington instead of Campbelltown. Currently, services extend as far as Richmond, but on late nights only, and on weekends, the line terminates at Liverpool instead of Leppington. So what's the actual issue with the line? First, it's overcrowded. In 2019, morning peak trains averaged 157% of their capacity. By comparison, the next highest line was the T8, which sat at 148%. The afternoon peak fared much better, with T5 trains only topping at 106% of their capacity. Obviously, this dropped during the pandemic, where total trips dropped from 704,954 in September 2019 to 366,535 in September of the following year. For the most part, it still hasn't recovered, with the line only seeing 431,380 passengers in February 2023. Unfortunately, there's not been another report on peak train loads since September 2020, so I can't give definitive numbers, but I'd have to guess most of those trips are within peak hours, as trains are generally standing room only during the morning and afternoon peaks, and outside of the peak, they're almost always empty. Curiously, off-peak trains are normally 8-car A sets in my experience, which just makes being crammed into a 4-car Millennium during peak even more heinous. The other main issue is that it can't really be used unless you're commuting. This is less of an issue since the main south and main western lines have T2 and T1 trains running at 15-minute frequencies, so anyone travelling along those routes have good options. But the issue is for people travelling from one line to the other. For example, if you're travelling from Wentworthville to Merrylands, the fastest way is to get a T5 train, but if you miss it, well, have fun waiting half an hour for the next one. The low frequency makes using the T5 for shorter journeys inconvenient at best. To summarise, the issue with the T5 is that it's overcrowded in peak, and it's too infrequent to be used for anything other than commuting. At the moment, this is fine, but it's only going to deteriorate in future. Sydney's population is still growing, and we need to encourage people to commute by public transport more if we want to meet our climate goals. If we want that to happen, the T5 needs to be a better service. And to do that, it needs to be more frequent and less crowded. As for the fix, run more and longer trains. But that's not so simple. In my opinion, off-peak is fine. At those times, the 4-car trains barely fill up, so I don't believe 8-car trains are necessary. However, during peak hours, 8-car trains are almost certainly necessary. As for frequency, 30 minutes is fine for the commuter-orientated nature that it currently has, but as time goes on, higher frequency will be essential for encouraging more local trips. In the short term, I see 2 real options for improving the line: 8-car trains on peak or 15-minute frequencies. So which should we aim for? I see a few drawbacks and advantages for each. For a 4-car every 15 minutes, this would bring the T5 in line with other Sydney suburban services and would increase the line's capacity, while also making it more suitable for shorter journeys. It would also reduce the amount of time people have to wait at Parramatta, which can also help avoid overcrowding issues. There is one big but, however. In general, the tracks the T5 use can support up to 20 trains per hour per direction, so adding more trains there shouldn't be an issue. Parramatta Station, on the other hand, cannot. Currently, the T5 uses platform 3 for both directions, which already creates a bottleneck. The reason it does this is to allow T2 line trains to terminate at platform 4. This creates quite a large bottleneck, but there are workarounds. We could remove the terminating T2 trains at Parramatta and then use both platforms for the T5, but I don't think that'd go down well with commuters. The other option is to add an additional platform or turnback at Parramatta, but that would add millions to the cost, so it would only be viable as a long-term project. The other option is to continue T2 trains out west to Blacktown and terminate them there, which could be a good option if we wanted to increase services along the main Western line, but it would also increase the turnaround time for T2 trains, therefore requiring more trains for the existing service, so it's not really an option either. The other option is an 8-car every 30 minutes, which in my opinion is the most viable. It has the benefit of not requiring any real modifications to the timetable or new infrastructure. The problem is it doesn't solve the frequency issue, but it would be significantly cheaper, and the frequency issue is less pressing in my opinion. Both of these proposals do have one issue in common though. They'll both need more trains. But it shouldn't be too much of an issue, as the H sets are replacing the K set in the coming years, and that should provide an additional 15 4-car trains to the suburban network. The Bankstown line is also being converted into a metro, and that should also free up more Millenniums and Waratahs. Both of these should provide enough rolling stock for either higher frequencies or longer trains on the T5. The final point to cover is politics. Since there was an election recently, I'll have a look at the Greens, Labor and Liberal Party platforms to see if they have any relevant proposals. For this, we'll be going from left to right on the political spectrum. First is the Greens, who don't really have much of a policy on public transport. Their entire platform boils down to making transport free, building more trains in Australia, and ending privatisation. I reached out to them on Twitter to see if they had any relevant policies in regards to T5 or rail services, but received no response. Next is Labor, who have basically the same policy, except without the free public transport part. Similar to the Greens, my reach out for comment also received no response. Finally, the Liberals, which actually have something tangible. They're proposing to build a new metro line between Western Sydney Airport and St Mary's, with a line eventually spanning from Schofields in the north to Macarthur in the south. This project would relieve some of the stress on the T5, but it's not necessarily aimed for people travelling from southwest or northwest Sydney to Parramatta, and the first section isn't meant to open until 2026, so it's not really going to help in the short or long term. The Liberal government also has the More Trains, More Services program, but I've only been able to find reliable sources discussing Stage 2, which involve more services on the T2, T4 and T8 lines. But one of the companies involved does state on the website that Stage 3 and 4 will involve a quote, T5 fleet build-up. As to what that means, I'm not sure. I'm assuming it's referring to building up T5 trains into 8 cars, or maybe allocating more trains to the line. But it doesn't go into detail, nor link to any other sources, and I'm not able to find anything else, so I don't really know. So out of these 3 options, it's the Liberals who actually have somewhat of a plan to improve the T5, which is unfortunate for me. It's no secret I'm not a fan of the Liberals, but I've got to say fair's fair. Labor and the Greens basically have no policies, at least that I can find. Even if I assume that the Greens and Labor would continue to support the More Trains, More Services program, which I think they would, they still have nothing else, which is unfortunate. To conclude, the T5 needs improving. If we want to reduce traffic on our roads and achieve our climate goals, we need to do more, because right now the T5 is a pain to commute on. I personally believe that the best short-term option is to increase train lengths to 8 cars on peak, with a long-term goal of increasing frequencies to every 15 minutes. Hopefully, this is undertaken in the coming years, but as of right now, no party has a solid plan to do anything about it, apart from the Liberals. And even then, it's not direct, nor really confirmed.